Hi, this is Lisa with Holland Designs Crochet. I would like to give you some tips today on how to estimate yardage for a blanket. If you are wanting to customize the size or use different materials, different yarn and different hook size than what was used in the sample. So for instance, many of my patterns, many of my blankets are written in a way where you are given the math so that you can customize the sizing and use yarn and hook of choice. This is the Squish Factor Afghan, which I designed last year, and it has been really popular. It's a beautiful reversible knit look texture, very squishy as per the name, and lovely in this size 3 yarn that I used. So the sample was done in a size 3 yarn, DK weight yarn, and using a K 6.5 millimeter hook. This is a video that I filmed last year when I was making the sample. This is the size 3 yarn that I use. Beautiful texture, but it also looks beautiful in a heavier yarn. Today I received a message from a lady who had purchased the Squish Factor Afghan pattern from me on Etsy, and she did say she was a beginner and she needed some extra help. So what she wanted was to create a blanket for a twin size bed. So I talked to her for a while and I got the specific dimensions that she wanted to make the blanket, and I also asked her what kind of yarn she wanted to use. So she wanted to actually order some yarn that was on sale, and she wanted to use a size 4 yarn. So she wanted to know ahead of time how much yardage she would need for a twin size blanket. So that takes a little bit of math and a little bit of, in this case, swatching to figure that out. So she wasn't confident to do that on her own because she was, like she said, a beginner. So I offered to do it for her. So basically I found a size 4 yarn that I had here, and I used 8 millimeter hook. So I told her that that would be a good hook size for this pattern with that particular yarn. And I am working to my own gauge, so her gauge may be slightly different, but this was a good way to estimate. And so I created a swatch that was 6 inches by 6 inches, and I'll show you just a video of how I did that and how I weighed that, so I can give you some understanding of how you can do this yourself as well. All right, here is the yarn that I used to create the swatch in the size 4 heavier weight yarn. So that's a ran worsted weight yarn, and this is what the Squish Factor stitch looks like in that particular yarn. So it's incredibly soft and squishy, reversible fabric. So the same on both sides. Very luxury to feeling. And so the hook I used was this 8 millimeter with this size 4 yarn, which was the materials I had recommended to the lady that I was speaking with. And so I swatched it up for her. So basically I made a piece that ended up being 6 inches by 6 inches. And that was my starting chain count for this was 21 chains. And so I kept note of that so I would know how to tell her how many chains she would need to begin, because she really needed or wanted that information. So I had 21 chains to begin, and I worked my rows until it also measured 6 inches tall. So 6 inches by 6 inches. And so what I do with that information then is I calculate the square inches. So 6 times 6 is 36 inches. So this is a 36 square inch piece. And I use that then to later calculate the total yardage that I will need for a larger blanket. So she wanted to do a twin size, and she gave me the specific measurements that she wanted. And so I was able to plug that into just a chart on an Excel spreadsheet and estimate the yardage for her. So once I made my swatch, I then just used a kitchen scale, which is very handy, not only for baking and cooking, but also for measuring or weighing things when you're doing crafts, if you want to know how much yardage you might need. So I just weighed my swatch, and it came to about 19 grams. And so what I did was I just rounded up to 20. So it's always a good idea to round up your yardage estimate so that you're sure to have enough and not run out. And so I rounded that up to 20 for her and put that in my size, the chart that I sent her. So yes, it was 19, perhaps up to 20 grams. And on the actual yarn itself, it'll have the grams and also the yardage So this one here, 200 grams. And also I look on Ravelry, so I look up the actual yarn on Ravelry and use that to help me calculate the yardage per gram. So for instance, this was 200 grams total, so when I put the project on Ravelry, I just put 0.1 skein. That's a 20 grams, 0.1, and that just gave me automatically about 40 yards. So I'll put a link to the project that I created for this, so you can actually look at that as well on Ravelry. Here is the chart that I made on Excel for the lady I was helping today. So she did want to use a size 4 yarn, larger hook to make a twin size blanket. So I created a chart and I filled in the information here. My swatch, when I measured it, it was 6 inches by 6 inches. And so number 1 here on my list is make a square swatch in yarn and hook of choice for finished project. So you could do a square that was like 4 inches by 4 inches, 5 inches by 5 inches, whatever you prefer, but mine happened to be 6 inches by 6 inches. You can also keep track of the starting number of chains that you needed for your swatch, and that will help you calculate the starting chain for your full size blanket. So the math for this pattern was a multiple of 4 plus 1. So on my chart, I put my swatch was 20 chains plus 1, and that I calculated if I wanted a 58-inch width for my twin size. I actually rounded up slightly because obviously the fabric can be stretchy as well. So I just rounded up slightly. So I made it 200 plus 1 as an estimate for the starting count for the twin size. And then also number 2 here says measure your swatch and calculate the size in square inches, which is length times width. So for mine, it was 6 times 6, which was 36 inches. And so I was able to use that information to calculate on my chart what a twin size would be in square inches. So for her, she gave me the measurements of 58 inches by 72 inches. So I did 58 times 72, which gave me my 4,176 square inches. So once I had that information, I also then was able to calculate how many swatches would be needed to make my twin size. And I have 116 on the chart. So basically what I did was I took 4,176 divided by 36 inches, square inches, and I came to 116. So that's how you do it. Basically, you take the square inches of your finished project, divide it by the square inches of the swatch, and that tells you how many swatches you need to make to complete the finished project. So 116 was my number. So I put that in the chart there. And I used that then to calculate the yardage and the grams for the actual finished project. So you can see on the size chart as well, I went through and after I weighed my swatch, I had it at about, I rounded up to 20 grams. I calculated how many yards per gram, yardage per that 20 grams. And I could use the information on the yarn label or also on Ravelry. So again, I'll link to that project so you can see how I do that on Ravelry. If you can find the yarn that you're using on Ravelry and it has the grams per skein and the yardage information there for you, it's just really helpful. Otherwise, you can again use a calculator or just in your head if it's easy enough to figure out. And so then I was able to plug that into my chart and also then calculate 116 times 20 gave me my 2,320 grams, and 116 times 40 yards per swatch gave me 4,640 yards. So I know if I'm going to buy yarn, like this lady was going to order some yarn online that was on sale, that I'm going to want at least about that amount, 4,640 yards to make this twin size. You can always round up, add an extra skein or two to your order just to make sure you have enough, you know, as long as it's in your budget. That's just a really good way to estimate the total. So I've given you this list here as well. You can read through that. It's more detailed about how you figure out all these different things, but you can also just change out, you know, create a chart of your own and change out the measurements and figure out what you would need it to be. So this can be really helpful for you. A kitchen scale, obviously, very helpful, very handy tool to have, and just some of those basic math techniques that you need to remember from school, how to calculate square yardage, or sorry, square inches, and then how to calculate swatches per, you know, the twin size. Some of those things maybe you have to remember what we were taught back in school. But it's nothing too difficult once you can just fill in those numbers. So I hope it's very helpful to you. And I hope that you're able to use this to customize any blankets or other items you might be making in future.